11 feet. That was the distance between the guard station and the cell door. Not across a building, not down some long hallway. 11 feet, roughly the length of a Honda Civic. 2 correctional officers were assigned to that station the night Jeffrey Epstein died. Both of them later admitted they'd fallen asleep. Both said they didn't hear a thing. No sound of tearing fabric, no movement, nothing at all. When that prison footage first came out, I remember thinking the space looked bigger than I expected. The camera angles made it seem spread out. You got the sense that maybe 2 sleeping officers just genuinely missed what was happening somewhere else in the building. Then the new interior footage dropped, and it changes everything. Once you see the actual dimensions of that space, the official version of events doesn't sit the same way anymore. True Locus examines how forensic evidence, physical spaces, and behavioral patterns intersect in high-profile cases. If this kind of structured analysis is valuable to you, you may consider subscribing to follow the series. And you're welcome to share where you're watching from. The Metropolitan Correctional Center was built in 1975 in Lower Manhattan. It was designed for about 450 inmates awaiting trial. Not a big place. And by the time Epstein arrived in 2019, the Bureau of Prisons had been quietly underfunding it for years. Staffing had gotten thin, maintenance kept getting deferred, cameras were failing, and nobody was fixing them. All of that matters. But the thing that really matters is the layout. Epstein was held in the special housing unit, which is built around 2 tiers, upper and lower. The guard station sits at the junction where those tiers meet, positioned so officers can watch both directions at once. It's a pretty standard setup for a facility like this. What the new footage shows is how unbelievably compact that junction is. I keep coming back to this because it genuinely surprised me. You've got the officer station, the stairwell, and the cell doors all essentially in the same room. We're not talking about a guard posted in some office down a hallway behind 2 sets of doors. We're talking about a space tight enough that if you spoke in a normal voice at one end, someone at the other end would hear you clearly. Multiple inmates have confirmed exactly that. So here's what happened on the night of August 9th going into the 10th. Epstein was found unresponsive around 6:30 in the morning. The last real check on him, one that somebody actually physically performed, not just logged, was hours earlier. Could have been as many as 8 hours, depending on which account you go by. The 2 officers on duty, Tova Knoll and Michael Thomas, were later charged with falsifying those records. They'd been signing off on wellness checks they never did, 11 feet away from his cell. Now, the bedsheet. Epstein reportedly used a standard issue bedsheet. If you want to do anything with that kind of fabric, and I'm being careful with how I phrase this, you'd need to tear it. And bedsheet cotton doesn't tear quietly. Anyone who's ever ripped that kind of fabric knows it resists. You have to pull hard. It makes a sharp, loud sound, the kind of sound that carries through concrete. And nobody heard it. If you really want to understand Epstein, not just what he did, but why everything around him was structured the way it was, you have to start with control, not power, not money. He had plenty of both, but those were instruments. They were how he got what he actually needed, which was total control over his environment and every person in it. How people behaved around him, what they said, what they thought of him when he left the room. Psychologists have a clinical term for this kind of thing: pervasive need for situational dominance. It's related to narcissism, but it goes further. It's this orientation where the world has to be arranged in a specific way at all times, and the moment it isn't, even over something trivial, there's a disproportionate internal reaction, not just frustration, something closer to panic. I wasn't sure about that framing until I went through the files. And then it was everywhere. You've probably seen clips of the island footage by now. There's this video of Epstein chasing a young person around a kitchen. If you just glance at it, it reads as roughhousing. There's laughing, movement, somebody behind the camera giggling. Watch him, though. Specifically, his body. He starts with a slow jog, real loose, almost theatrical. He's expecting this to end fast, and she's supposed to stop, let herself get caught. That's the version of this he had in his head. She doesn't stop. And right there, you can see it shift. His jog slows to a walk. His smile drops. His hands start going at his sides, fidgeting. Within a few seconds, he's not playing anymore. He's reassessing. And you can tell it's not the running that's bothering him, it's that the situation went somewhere he didn't plan for. For someone wired this way, losing the script on something this minor is genuinely threatening. You see the exact same pattern in the prison recordings. There's footage of Epstein taping a message for people on the outside, and he's trying to be casual about it. He mentions having to borrow Scotch tape to hang pictures, talks about some incident with another inmate, tries to frame it all as no big deal. His body doesn't cooperate. His eyes keep dropping. His voice gets quiet. His whole posture folds inward, kind of collapses on itself. Those aren't the mannerisms of someone telling a funny story. Those are shame indicators, and they're pronounced. Just think about who this man was for 30 years. He curated dinner parties for billionaires, cultivated relationships with world leaders, built a private island where every detail was designed to project an image he'd chosen. Everything managed, everything intentional. Now he's in a federal holding cell borrowing Scotch tape. I don't say that to make him sympathetic. I say it because it's the key to understanding the rest of the story. When someone with this psychological makeup loses that kind of control, the distress isn't proportional. It's total, which brings me to how the whole operation actually worked. Epstein didn't build this alone. We know that much, but I don't think most people appreciate how structured the system around him really was. Ghislaine Maxwell, there's been a lot of coverage of her, obviously, but I want to zero in on something specific because I think it gets lost in the broader story. Court documents and victim testimony don't describe Maxwell as just a recruiter or even just a close associate. What they describe is more like an operations manager. She ran logistics, she managed people's behavior, and critically, she managed perception. Both the victim's perception of Epstein and Epstein's perception of himself. Victims have described arriving at his properties and being given what I'd call a behavioral script, not just ground rules, specific instructions. How to greet him, how to talk to him, what kind of letters to write afterward. Maxwell reportedly coached them on their tone of voice, their body language, how to make Epstein feel admired every single time he walked into a room. That's not grooming in the way people usually use that word. That's something more industrial than that. That's a managed system designed around one person's psychological needs. And here's where the new files push this even further. The FBI flagged a Reddit account they believed was tied to Maxwell. This account had been posting questions about which U.S. states had the lowest marriage age requirements, and the detail that caught investigators' attention was the phrasing. The post said American states. Americans don't say that. We say states or U.S. states. American states is how a foreigner would phrase it. Maxwell obviously is British-born and French-educated, so you've got someone connected to this operation doing targeted legal research on public forums, not casually browsing, actively investigating what jurisdictions would be most permissive. Combine that with the financial material in the files, bags of cash photographed next to images of prominent people, gaming accounts, and digital subscriptions that don't track with anything Epstein was personally interested in, and you start to see something that was built to be layered, compartmentalized. Difficult to trace back to a single point. One more thing from the files, because I think it's revealing for a different reason. There's an email exchange about a private group called the Zodiac. Not the serial killer, a social club. According to the email, there are exactly 12 members at any time. Each one represents a zodiac sign. The writer names some well-known figures as members. He says you're in until you die, but if your mind starts to go, all right, they put you into, his exact phrase, eccentric orbit, meaning they just stop inviting you. Epstein's entire reply is 4 words. Murray doesn't play well in groups. I almost skipped past this the first time, but it stuck with me. Someone sends him this whole description of an exclusive club with powerful members, and his instinct isn't curiosity. It's not flattery, it's dismissal. He immediately evaluates someone else's fitness because that's the reflex. He's always the one doing the assessing, never the one being assessed. Even over something as low stakes as a dinner club, the wiring is identical. So, August 10th, 2019, back to the MCC. What we know, Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell that morning. The medical examiner ruled it a suicide. 2 guards got charged with falsifying logs, and the security camera covering that hallway wasn't functioning. What the space tells us, the guard station was 11 feet from the cell. The hallway camera, had it actually been working, would have had a clean, direct sight line to every door on that tier, and other inmates on the unit later said they could routinely hear what the guards were saying to each other. Just normal conversation through concrete walls and steel doors, what we still don't know, and this is the part I keep circling back to. Nobody's adequately explained why Epstein was taken off suicide watch after an incident just weeks before. His cellmate was transferred out right beforehand, leaving him alone in his cell, which isn't how it's supposed to work for someone in his situation. And 2 officers who were both pulling extreme overtime hours because the facility was critically understaffed ended up being the only people responsible for monitoring what was probably the most consequential federal inmate in a generation. I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to tell you what happened in that cell. Investigations have been conducted, conclusions were reached. That's the official record. But here's what I will say. Analysis doesn't stop at the conclusion. Analysis asks whether the evidence underneath that conclusion holds up when you look at it closely. Whether the distances and the timelines and the failures all fit together as neatly as they need to. 11 feet is about the length of a dining table, maybe less. On one side of that distance, 2 officers were asleep. On the other side, a man who had information that could have redrawn the map of power and corruption in this country died without making a sound. That's the story we've been given. I'll leave it to you to decide whether it's enough. Epstein spent his whole adult life building systems to make sure he controlled everything around him. Every environment, every person, every impression anyone walked away with. The irony, and it's a heavy one, is where it ended. A 9x7 cell. Feet from a guard station. Cameras that were supposed to be watching. That's the one environment he couldn't manage. The one room where none of his money or his connections or his carefully constructed image made any difference at all. And somehow, in a space that small and that monitored, that close to people whose entire job was to watch him, nobody saw a thing. If this analysis was useful, you may consider subscribing to continue examining how physical evidence and behavioral patterns intersect in cases like these.